Hey, thank you very much. It was a very gracious introduction. I'm actually delighted to be here. TASH has long held a special place in my heart, and it's an important time. It's an important time for TASH and the, good, you got the slides. The opportunities and the systems that TASH is able to contribute to society. Let me share a little bit more with you about who I am, and I want to make just two main ideas that I want you to take away from the next half hour or so. So first off, well, Dave did a nice job telling you about the academic things that I've done, things that I really would like you to know. One, I was a residential provider in California. And one of the things that really got me first engaged in the area of disabilities, and especially severe disabilities, was working with young kids with significant problem behaviors in Central Valley of California. From that, I moved into being a special education teacher, and I was a teacher in a situation with a classroom of kids with severe disabilities. When I became a professor at the University of Oregon, one of the roles that I was able to have is I worked with the Guardianship, Advocacy, and Protective Services Board in Oregon. And that board did two things. One, we actually rewrote the limited guardianship law for the state, but we also served in the active role of guardians for people with significant developmental disabilities in the state who had really no one else who was looking out for them. In that role, I actually had several people that I was supposed to be serving as guardian for. One of them was a young man named Ryan. Ryan had severe intellectual disabilities. He had quadriplegia. He did not talk. And he'd been in Oregon's institution all his life. Long ago, before I met him, they'd lost all contact with his family. And for a couple of years, I was basically the only person other than institution staff that he interacted with. I would visit him on a regular basis. I would hold his hand. He would look at me. We got eye contact, and I'd get, you know, that little squeeze you get periodically. But it wasn't the kind of life that Ann Turnbull talks about when she talks about an enviable lifestyle. I mean, this is a kid who was really struggling. And the last time that I saw him, he was having trouble breathing, and I had to sort of get somebody from the medical staff to come in. And 2 days later, after that, 2 days later, I got a call, and they told me he died. And I had a sense of complete and utter inadequacy in the role that I had had to actually look out for this young man. The issues, the responsibility, the trust that I'd been given. And in part, it was that sense of realizing that we must do much more that really is the heart of what TASH is all about. TASH is the voice, the advocate, the vision for people who continually and repeatedly and in so many different ways are marginalized and placed at risk in our society. Now, since then, one of the things we did is we were actually able to build programs for community support. We were able to close the state institution. We were able to create opportunities in Oregon's communities for people with the most extreme problem behaviors, self-injury, aggression, and for people with real significant medical disabilities. Part of what we learned from that is the success of operating without the institution taught us that inclusion by itself is insufficient. John O'Brien taught us early on that it's not inclusion that's the goal. It's really the quality of life that's the goal. Now, in my professional career, most of what I've done is I've focused on building systems that will be less noisy. Building systems that will work better for people who have significant problem behaviors. One of the real messages I want you to take away is I want you to take away a sense that behavior support really makes a difference. And it's not just behavior support the way that we think about it in schools and residential programs. Behavior support is really about the creation of effective environments where people can be successful. The other big message that I would give is that if we're going to be successful, we in TASH, who work so hard for people with significant disabilities, need to be equally focused on the large systems and settings in which they operate. I've been working recently with George Sugai, Tim Lewis, and others, and part of what they've taught is everything that we know about how to make things work for people with significant disabilities can actually extend and make typical schools, whole work environments, health systems, neighborhoods more effective. Part of what we're learning is that we need to do a better job of marrying the science and the values that really are at the heart of what TASH is all about. So here's a graph. I mean, this is to give you a sense of what science is about. Those of you who are worried that you're going to have to actually read the graph, that is just a symbol. Don't worry. All right? But here's what I want you to think about. I want you to think about behavior support. I mean, how many of you have worked with, know somebody, or been around someone whose behavior placed them at risk? All right, 98.3%. The rest of you, talk to your neighbor. Now, part of what I want you to know, we all start by saying, come on, cowboy, you've got to behave in a way that is more effective for you and fits with the other people around you. That's fine, but that advocacy is insufficient. Here's what TASH has taught us. The science says focus on this. Above all, focus not just on what people do, but why they keep doing it. Understand, give people the dignity of understanding why they are engaging in the behavior they're engaging in. Second, behavior support is not about changing people. It's about changing the context. Change the schedule, the support, the setting, the communication opportunities. That's what will produce durable, real change. Don't focus on behavior support with the old idea of only focusing on consequences, right? I mean, come on. When many of us were first taught about disabilities and behavior, we were taught that the consequences are what mattered. Reward and acknowledge what you want, punish and ignore things you don't. So part of what it was, I want you to move beyond that. Behavior support from now on always involves teaching. It involves listening. It involves building the systems that work. Of all the other things that I can do, those of you who are actually involved in behavior support, make sure that we don't create environments that are systematically rewarding doing things the wrong way. Too often we blame a person because we've put her in a position where she gets rewarded for things that are not what we actually want. And the other part is there's big discussion about whether rewards should be used or not used. Basically, we got to get beyond that. People respond to the way in which their environment operates. Different people need different levels of support. It's not about creating something that is artificial or mechanical. It's about creating something that is individual, that is tied to preference of the individual. But the real point of this slide is I want you to come together with the idea that science matters. And everything that TASH is about making that work. The other message that I give over and over again is that science without values is irrelevant. John O'Brien taught us long ago, longer than he would honestly admit, that it's not just what you do to do the behavior, it's the quality of life that people perform. So think about what Wayne Saylor taught us. Think about what Freda Brown comes back to over and over again. Unless we are creating lifestyles that are tied to personal values, we are very prone to use the science inappropriately. Positive behavior support, which grew from the values of TASH, is the integration of science, values, outcomes, and partly, an important thing, systems change. And part of what I want to do, the first real message that I have is this message of marrying science and values. The second real message that I've got is if we're going to create settings that work not just for the system, they work for families, they work for building and maintaining the bonds that make things work. They work to help kids be embedded in, actively engaged in their schools. They work to build the social networks that are so critical to quality of life. If we're going to do that, we've got to do a better job than we've done so far. The past 15 years, I've been working specifically in schools, lots of schools. And here's a worry I've got. Too often in the United States, and this is true in Georgia too, we draw a circle and we say, here's a school. And within that circle, here are kids for whom the school can be effective. But I want you to think about the number of meetings you've been at. Have you ever been at one of those meetings where we say, look, here's Darren. Darren is somebody we love. We're very impressed with Darren's assets and skills. But Darren engages in behaviors that are a real challenge for us and for others. We would like to find a place for Darren that is appropriate for him, that is successful for him, preferably very far from us. You ever been in one of those meetings? All right, that's not okay. That's not okay. I got to tell you, I'm worried. I'm worried when I watch, as people respond to the fiscal struggles of the country, that the circle's getting smaller. I look at the kids who are identified as being outside the circle because of their disabilities, outside the circle because they don't learn fast enough, outside the circle because they're questioning, they're difficult, outside the circle because others don't want to be around them. Here's what I want for Tash. If the vision and values that we talk about work, I want you to make the circle larger. I want you to find a way in which we advocate strongly for those kids with the most significant disabilities, but unilaterally for all kids. If the vision of Tash as really embracing social justice is true, we've got to do something where we're talking about how we actually build organizational systems. Now, George Sugai is a professor at the University of Connecticut, and he has been teaching us about systems that'll make schools more effective. Part of what George has taught us is everything that we know about teaching individuals applies to the classroom. Everything we know about building effective classrooms applies to making schools that work. And unless we braid those together, we will always have disjointed, inefficient systems of support. So part of what we've been doing, we've been focusing on this notion of school-wide positive behavior support. And you've heard, I've seen some of the sessions that have been here, where we're trying to say, how do we build a social culture that is predictable, consistent, positive, and safe for all kids? How do we build a social culture that's going to work, not just for some, but for us all? And how do we make the vision of Tash not a vision of the 1%, but a vision of the 99%? How do we make Tash something that is influencing the full 90,000 schools in the United States? We currently work with over 16,000 schools in 44 states. In each one of those states, they are building behavior support systems that enhance the academic and social success of kids. One of the critical themes of that is start by looking at saying all kids fit in that triangle. This is all kids, and this is one of the mantras we used all long time ago, and it keep coming back to over and over, is all means all. Part of what we know is that we've got to start not by ignoring everybody else, but by saying, what do you establish as you walk in the door that'll make a school more effective for those kids at greatest risk? What do you establish in a school right now that'll make it more accessible and successful with those kids with the most extreme needs? The key themes: make it predictable, make it consistent, make it positive, and make it safe. It's good for everybody, and it's especially good for those kids who need a little bit more support. Now, these are not kids who need a lot. They need a little bit more. If we build multi-tiered systems, everybody gets basically good support, more intense support for those kids who need it more, and the most intense support for those kids who need it most, we will build integrated systems that actually meet some of the vision and values. Now, part of what we're getting, part of what we've learned, and this has been humbling, is this is harder to do than you might think. Schools are much more comfortable focusing on the green part of the triangle than they are the red. And what we are finding in states where we're being successful, in Illinois, in Oregon, in states that are embedding and pushing for those kids with the most intense needs, we're having to join forces, not just with education, but with mental health, with community systems, the wraparound structures that Lucille Eber is so strong at advocating, the systems of care. Those are themes that are not common in TASH, but are going to be critical if we actually move forward. So in part, if we're really going to build systems that work, one of our messages that I would give is we've got to focus on the real needs of people. And problem behavior, quite frankly, problem behavior is the single most common reason why kids are excluded from typical environments. It's something that we've got to address at multiple levels. And I want you to focus on the quality of what happens, the equity with which it's delivered. And because of the times that we are, and now because Dave has taught us that we are conservative Republicans, all right? I want you to focus on efficiency. So in part of the message, all the values, all the messages that you hear in sessions at TASH, I want you to ask the question, do we actually have the data to support what we believe and we think? Because if we don't, we have an obligation, we have a self-disciplined obligation to be able to document what works. Here's what I can tell you about school-wide positive behavior support. If you implement, if a school building implements school-wide positive behavior support, there'll be a 20 to 60% reduction in problem behavior. If they implement with fidelity for 2 years, there'll be both academic gains and an increase in the circle, the proportion of kids with whom they can be successful. The school will be perceived as a safer environment. And one of the other messages, don't let the flickers get you, is that we've got to make this work, not just for the kids, but for the adults also. Let me give you just a real quick, very short summary of a study that has recently been accepted for publication but has not been published yet. This is focused on the staff, and it has two messages that I really want you to have. One is that this can work for teachers, and the second is that social justice applies across disability, ethnicity, gender, and sexual preference. We actually looked at schools that implemented PBIS and schools that were not. We asked the teachers to give us information to take standardized measures of whether they were effective as teachers. How effective are you? So these are data. So over here are schools that were not implementing PBS. These are matched schools that were. The question is, how effective are you with the array of kids that you've got in your class? Now, those of you who get excited about science, all right, this was a randomized control measure. We used chi-square analysis with a chi-square of 30.91, probability of 0.001, and effect size of 0.43. For those of you who are less excited about that sort of stuff, this bar is bigger. All right? No, it's a whole lot bigger. This is the big bar here. All right? You want to be in the big bar. Okay, you laugh. But this is important. And let me tell you why. Because, and this is, I know this is really tough, but hang in there. The story behind this picture is worth the hassle. These are schools. These are the schools. And on the bottom down here was the extent to which they were using PBS. On the vertical axis is the extent to which the teachers were effective. Each dot represents a school. There are 3 sets of dots, the ones with the blue line, the ones with the green line, the ones with the red line. The blue line were from schools that came from high socioeconomic status environments. If you look at the blue line, it's basically flat. What that means is teachers thought they were really good whether they were using PBS or not. They thought they were really doing well. All right, that's cool. But I want you to look at the green and the red. You know what the story is there? If you come from lower income communities, the likelihood that the teachers found themselves being more effective, more successful, more capable with a wider range of kids was directly related to whether they implemented a school-wide system that created a social culture that was predictable, consistent, positive, and safe. Essentially, part of the message I bring, science makes a difference. Science without values is irrelevant. Focusing on the individual is essential. Focusing on the individual without building the multiple tiers won't work. TASH, at its heart, is the integration of science, values, and vision. If we do this well, the people will experience something that is tied not to our values, but to their values. The message of person-centered planning, the message of TASH is listen. The message of TASH for a long time has been to focus on the individual supports that the brothers, sisters, daughters, sons that we know well need. The message I bring is that that is essential and insufficient. We need to build whole schools, whole neighborhoods, whole health systems, whole workplaces that are predictable, consistent, positive, and safe. If TASH works, we will make the circle wider, and when she asks for help, somebody will be there. Thank you.